What if the things you have been calling struggles, delays, and moments of weakness are actually revealing something much deeper about your relationship with God? What if being blessed by God does not always look like an easy life, constant success, or having every prayer answered the way you expected? The world has its own definition of a blessed woman, but Scripture points to something far more powerful. A woman can be walking through uncertainty and still be deeply favored by God. She can be waiting, grieving, rebuilding, or fighting battles nobody else can see, and yet God may be shaping her for a purpose she has not discovered yet. So before you judge your life by what you can see, pause for a moment, because there are signs of God's work that often appear in the very places where you feel weakest. Maybe you have wondered why certain doors closed. Maybe you have asked why God allowed certain relationships to end, why your plans did not unfold, or why you had to endure seasons that seemed completely unfair. But what if those moments were not evidence that God had abandoned you? What if they were teaching you something you could never learn through comfort alone? A woman blessed by God is not necessarily a woman who never suffers. She is a woman who learns how to walk through suffering without allowing it to destroy her faith. And that distinction changes everything. Because when you understand it, you stop measuring God's presence by your circumstances and begin recognizing His hand in the middle of them. The first sign is that you begin to understand that your life has purpose. You stop believing that you are simply moving through random circumstances, and you begin to recognize that God can use your life for something greater than yourself. Scripture reminds us that God knows us before we are even formed in the womb, and that truth means your identity does not begin with your achievements, your mistakes, your appearance, your family background, or the opinions of other people. Your deepest identity comes from the one who created you. And once that truth begins to settle into your heart, something changes. You no longer need everyone to approve of you because you understand that your worth was never dependent on their approval in the first place. But discovering purpose does not mean suddenly knowing every detail of your future. In fact, sometimes God reveals purpose one step at a time. That can be frustrating because we want the entire map before we move, while faith often asks us to take the next step before we can see the destination. Think about Esther. She could not have known everything that would happen when she entered a position of influence. Yet her courage became part of a much larger story. Ruth could not see the future when she chose loyalty and stepped into an unfamiliar life. Mary could not possibly understand every consequence of the calling placed before her, yet she responded with trust. Their stories remind us that God does not always explain the entire journey before asking us to begin it. And that is where the second sign begins to appear. Faith becomes stronger than fear. A blessed woman can still experience fear. She can still feel uncertainty. She can still have nights when she wonders how everything will work out. The difference is that fear no longer gets the final word. She learns to bring that fear to God instead of allowing it to dictate her decisions. She starts asking a different question. Instead of saying, what if everything goes wrong? She begins asking, what if God is with me even here? That small change can transform the way she faces an entire season of life. Because faith is not pretending that problems do not exist. Faith is choosing where you will place your trust when problems do exist. There will be moments when the answer is delayed, when the door remains closed, and when the future looks uncertain. But those moments can become a training ground for deeper trust. You begin remembering the times God carried you before, and those memories become evidence that you do not have to surrender to panic today. You may not know how the story will end, but you can know who is walking with you through it. And sometimes faith requires obedience before understanding. That is why the examples of biblical women are so powerful. Esther had to act despite danger. Ruth had to move forward without knowing everything that awaited her. Mary had to trust God's word, even when the assignment placed before her was overwhelming. None of them were promised an effortless path. Instead, they were invited into something greater than comfort. Their courage did not come from having no questions. It came from trusting God enough to move despite those questions. But there is another sign that reveals whether this faith is truly changing your life. Because genuine faith does not remain hidden inside the heart. It begins transforming the way you treat other people. A woman who understands God's mercy gradually becomes someone who can extend mercy. She begins to recognize pain in others because she has experienced her own. She becomes slower to condemn and quicker to listen. She discovers that compassion is not simply feeling sorry for someone. It is choosing to respond with love when love is inconvenient. This kind of love is especially powerful when nobody is watching. It is easy to appear kind when kindness brings praise. But a woman being transformed by God's love begins serving even when there is no applause. She checks on the lonely person. She encourages someone who feels forgotten. She forgives instead of feeding resentment. She gives when she could keep everything for herself. And she does these things not because she is trying to earn God's love of, but because she has already begun to understand what it means to receive it. Yet this does not mean allowing everyone to mistreat her. Biblical compassion is not the same as having no boundaries or ignoring truth. Sometimes love means speaking honestly. Sometimes wisdom means saying no. Sometimes forgiveness means releasing bitterness without returning to an unhealthy situation. A woman growing in God learns that grace and truth belong together. She can refuse hatred without refusing wisdom. She can forgive without pretending the wound never happened. And that balance reveals something important. God's work in her is not making her weaker. It is making her spiritually stronger. And that strength becomes especially visible when life becomes difficult. A woman blessed by God is not necessarily the woman who has never been broken. She may be the woman who has been broken and discovered that God can rebuild what she thought was permanently lost. She may carry scars from seasons nobody knows about, but those scars no longer have to define her. Every storm she survives can teach her something about endurance, patience, surrender, and hope. She learns that surviving is not the end of the story. God can use what she survived to shape the woman she becomes. But here is where many people misunderstand strength. They think a strong woman must carry everything alone. She must never cry. She must never admit weakness. She must solve every problem herself. Yet Christian strength works differently. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is admit, Lord, I cannot carry this by myself. Surrender is not defeat when you are surrendering your burden to God. It can be the beginning of peace. When she stops pretending that she has unlimited strength, she becomes more willing to depend on the one whose strength never runs out. And this is why the next sign is so important. When pressure increases, she does not make prayer her last resort. She makes it her first response. Before rushing into decisions, she pauses. Before allowing fear to control her, she brings the situation to God. Before reacting in anger, she seeks wisdom. Prayer becomes more than a religious routine. It becomes the place where she learns to realign her heart with God's will. And when that happens, something begins changing inside her even before anything changes around her. But there is a deeper reason prayer matters, and it is connected to what happens when God does not answer immediately. Because a woman who learns to pray through the waiting begins learning one of the hardest lessons of faith, patience. She discovers that silence does not necessarily mean absence, and delay does not automatically mean denial. Sometimes God is working in ways she cannot yet see. Sometimes the answer she wants would not produce the person she needs to become. And sometimes the waiting itself is preparing her for what comes next. That is where her journey becomes much more than a list of signs. Purpose leads to faith. Faith produces compassion. Compassion develops strength. Strength drives her toward prayer. And prayer teaches her patience. But there is still another transformation waiting, because once she learns to stop depending entirely on her own understanding, she begins seeking something greater than her own plans. She begins asking not merely, what do I want? But, Lord, what are you teaching me through this? And that question can completely change the direction of a woman's life. Because the moment she becomes willing to seek God's wisdom, instead of simply demanding her own way, she starts seeing situations differently. A closed door may become protection. A delay may become preparation. A painful ending may become the beginning of healing. And a season that once looked meaningless may suddenly reveal a purpose she could never have imagined. But that transformation does not happen overnight. It is built through choices, through waiting, through prayer, and through moments when she chooses faith even while fear is still present. And if you recognize yourself in these struggles, do not dismiss them too quickly. You may be seeing evidence that God is forming something in you right now, because the next sign is where everything begins to come together. The ability to seek God's wisdom when your own understanding tells you to go another way. The ability to seek God's wisdom when your own understanding tells you to go another way is one of the clearest signs that your faith is becoming deeper. Because there will be moments when your emotions demand an immediate answer, when everyone around you tells you what you should do, and when your own plans seem perfectly reasonable. But a woman who is learning to walk with God begins to understand that what feels right in the moment is not always what is right for her future. So instead of rushing, she pauses. Instead of reacting, she prays. Instead of allowing pressure to make the decision for her, she asks God for discernment. This kind of wisdom is not simply knowing more information. It is learning how to recognize what leads you closer to God and what quietly pulls you away from Him. You begin to notice that not every opportunity is an assignment, not every relationship is meant to continue, and not every open door is a door you should enter. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is walking away from something that looks attractive because you sense that God is asking you to choose something better. And that can be difficult because the world constantly tells you to chase whatever gives you immediate satisfaction. But a woman growing in spiritual wisdom learns to think beyond the moment. She begins asking different questions. Will this choice strengthen my relationship with God? Will this relationship bring peace or continually pull me into confusion? Am I responding from wisdom or from fear? Am I making this decision because I genuinely believe it is right or because I am desperate for approval? Those questions may feel uncomfortable, but they protect her from decisions that could create unnecessary pain. And the more she learns to seek God's direction, the more she discovers that wisdom often speaks quietly while fear screams loudly. That is why patience becomes so important. Sometimes God does not give immediate clarity because He is teaching her to wait. Waiting can feel like nothing is happening, but spiritually, waiting can be one of the most productive seasons of all. While she thinks God is delaying, He may be preparing her character, changing her priorities, strengthening her faith, or protecting her from something she cannot see. So instead of demanding that God explain everything, she begins trusting that His perspective is greater than hers. This does not mean she becomes passive. A wise woman knows the difference between waiting for God's direction and refusing to act because she is afraid. When God makes the next step clear, she moves. When the path remains uncertain, she waits. That balance requires discernment, because sometimes fear disguises itself as caution, while impatience disguises itself as faith. But through prayer and scripture, she gradually becomes better at recognizing the difference. And as her wisdom grows, something else changes. She becomes more careful about the voices she allows to influence her. She realizes that not every opinion deserves equal weight. Some people may love her, but still give advice based on fear. Others may speak confidently without understanding what God is doing in her life. So she learns to seek godly counsel while ultimately bringing every decision before the Lord. She becomes teachable without becoming easily controlled. She listens without surrendering her convictions. And that maturity protects her from being pulled in every direction by the expectations of other people. Her words begin changing too. Because wisdom is not only demonstrated through the decisions she makes, it is revealed through the way she speaks. She becomes slower to respond in anger and quicker to consider the consequences of her words. She learns that one sentence can heal a wounded heart, while another can create a wound that lasts for years. So she chooses words that build rather than destroy. This does not mean she becomes silent when truth needs to be spoken. Instead, she learns how to speak truth with grace. And that is another sign of spiritual growth. She no longer feels the need to win every argument. She begins to understand that peace is sometimes more valuable than proving a point. She can disagree without becoming hateful. She can establish boundaries without becoming bitter. She can forgive without pretending that nothing happened. She realizes that maturity is not having the loudest voice in the room. It is having enough self-control to know when your voice is needed and when silence is wiser. But even with all this wisdom, she still has moments of weakness. She still gets tired. She still wonders whether she is making the right choices. She still experiences disappointment. The difference is that she has learned where to take those feelings. Instead of allowing discouragement to become her identity, she brings it to God. Instead of hiding her questions, she brings them into prayer. Instead of assuming that one difficult season defines her entire future, she reminds herself that God is still writing the story. This is where patience becomes more than simply waiting for something to happen. Patience becomes learning to remain faithful while nothing appears to change. Anyone can praise God when everything is going according to plan. But there is a different kind of faith in continuing to trust when the prayer has not yet been answered, when the door has not yet opened, and when the breakthrough has not yet arrived. A woman who learns this kind of patience develops a strength that cannot be produced by comfort alone. Perhaps you are in that season right now. Perhaps you have prayed about the same situation for months or even years. You may wonder why God has not answered in the way you expected. You may look around and see other people moving forward while you feel as though your life is standing still. But do not assume that stillness means abandonment. Sometimes roots grow deepest in seasons when nothing is visible above the surface. God may be developing something in you that will become visible only later. And this is why the trials of a blessed woman do not automatically disappear. In fact, sometimes her trials become the place where her faith becomes most visible. She learns to survive without becoming hardened. She learns to suffer without losing compassion. She learns to wait without surrendering hope. She learns to be patient without becoming passive. And most importantly, she learns that her identity does not depend on whether life is currently comfortable. Because when your identity is rooted in God, circumstances can change without destroying you. People can leave without convincing you that you are worthless. Plans can fail without convincing you that your life has no purpose. A season can end without making you believe that your best days are behind you. You begin to understand that God's blessing is not always the absence of hardship. Sometimes the blessing is His presence and strength in the middle of hardship. Think about the moments when you thought you would not make it through, yet somehow you did. Think about the nights when you cried and still woke up the next morning. Think about the decisions you were terrified to make, but eventually made. Think about the doors that closed that you once desperately wanted to remain open. With time, you may begin to see that some of those closed doors protected you. Some disappointments redirected you. Some painful seasons taught you what comfort never could. And perhaps the most beautiful transformation is that you become grateful not only for what God gave you, but also for what He prevented. You stop demanding that every unanswered prayer be explained immediately. You begin trusting that God's no can be just as purposeful as His yes. That requires humility because it means admitting that you do not know everything. But it also brings freedom because you no longer have to control every outcome. A woman walking in this kind of faith becomes difficult to destroy with disappointment. Not because she never hurts, but because pain no longer has the authority to determine her identity. She can grieve and still hope. She can cry and still pray. She can be disappointed and still believe. She can be tired and still take another step. That is resilience shaped by faith. And it is one of the strongest signs that God has been working within her. But there is one more layer to this transformation. A blessed woman eventually realizes that her blessings are not meant to stop with her. The purpose God develops inside her is often connected to the people around her. Her patience can encourage someone who is struggling. Her testimony can give hope to someone who feels forgotten. Her compassion can become an answer to another person's prayer. Her wisdom can protect someone from making a painful decision. Her survival can become proof to another woman that surviving is possible. This is why your story matters, even the parts you wish you could erase. The season that embarrassed you may eventually become the story that gives someone else courage. The weakness you tried to hide may become the place where God's strength is most visible. The waiting you hated may become the lesson that teaches another person how to trust. Nothing surrendered to God has to be wasted. So if you have been wondering whether you are truly blessed by God, stop looking only at what you possess. Look at what God is producing within you. Are you becoming more patient? Are you learning to forgive? Are you seeking wisdom before acting? Are you turning toward prayer when life becomes difficult? Are you becoming stronger without becoming harder? Are you learning to trust God even when you cannot see the outcome? Because these changes reveal something far more valuable than temporary success. They reveal transformation. And transformation is often the evidence that God is doing His deepest work. So do not despise the season you are currently living through. You may not understand it yet, but God can use even this chapter. Keep praying. Keep seeking wisdom. Keep choosing faith over fear. Keep loving without allowing bitterness to control you. Keep moving forward when God says move. And keep waiting when He asks you to wait. You are not required to understand the entire journey today. You are only required to remain faithful to the next step. And when you finally look back, you may realize that the woman who entered this difficult season is not the same woman standing at the other side. She has learned how to survive, but more importantly, she has learned how to be patient. She has learned that God's timing cannot always be measured by human expectations, and that His presence can be more valuable than any immediate answer. But there is still one final truth that brings all these signs together, because being blessed by God is not simply about what He does for you. It is also about what He does through you. And when you begin to understand that, your entire view of your life, your struggles, your relationships, and even your waiting can change forever. What God does through you may be even more important than what He does for you. Because a truly blessed woman eventually realizes that her life is not only about receiving blessings, it is about becoming a blessing. The patience she learned through difficult seasons, the faith she developed when answers were delayed, the compassion formed through her own wounds, and the wisdom gained through painful decisions can all become gifts she offers to others. That is why you should never assume that your difficult experiences were meaningless. God can take what once brought you tears and transform it into something that brings someone else hope. Think about the woman who has survived a season she never believed she could survive. She may not feel powerful. She may still remember the nights when she cried, questioned everything, and wondered whether God had forgotten her. But now, when another woman walks through something similar, she has something valuable to offer. She can say, I understand. She can listen without judgment because she knows what it feels like to need someone who will simply stay. Her suffering did not automatically make her perfect, but it gave her compassion. And when compassion is surrendered to God, even a painful story can become a source of healing for someone else. This is why a blessed woman does not constantly compare her journey with someone else's. Comparison can make you believe that you are behind when God may simply be leading you along a different path. You see someone else's answered prayer, but you do not see their hidden battles. You see their success, but you do not see the years of preparation behind it. You see the destination, but you do not see the waiting that came before it. So if you measure your life against another person's timeline, you may become frustrated with a journey God never asked you to copy. Instead, he learns to ask, what is God doing in me right now? That question brings peace because it shifts her attention away from what she cannot control and toward what God is developing within her. Maybe this season is teaching her patience. Maybe it is teaching her courage. Maybe it is teaching her to establish boundaries. Maybe God is healing an old wound that has influenced her decisions for years. Maybe he is preparing her to carry responsibility she is not yet ready for. Whatever the reason, she learns not to waste the season simply because she does not yet understand it. And this is where surrender becomes one of the most powerful expressions of faith. Surrender does not mean giving up on your dreams. It means placing those dreams in God's hands and trusting him with the outcome. A woman who lives this way can work hard without worshiping success. She can desire marriage without believing that marriage determines her worth. She can pursue a career without making achievement her identity. She can hope for healing without believing that God owes her a specific outcome. Her desires are real, but they no longer control her. That freedom changes the way she responds when life does not go according to plan. Instead of immediately asking, why me? She begins asking, Lord, what are you teaching me? Instead of only asking God to remove the problem, she asks him to give her the strength and wisdom to walk through it. And sometimes that prayer changes the situation. Other times it changes her. But either way, she is no longer standing helplessly in the middle of the storm. She is learning how to remain anchored. And there will be storms. A blessed woman is not promised a life without them. In fact, some of the deepest lessons of faith are learned when the sky is dark and the outcome is uncertain. There may be betrayal, disappointment, rejection, financial pressure, family conflict, loneliness, or seasons where prayers seem to disappear into silence. But the presence of difficulty does not automatically mean the absence of God. Sometimes the greatest evidence of his work is the strength he gives you to keep walking when you thought you had nothing left. This is where prayer becomes more than words. Prayer becomes dependence. She begins her day by acknowledging that she needs God. Throughout the day, she returns to him when decisions arise. At night, she gives him the burdens she cannot solve. She prays not only for herself, but for people who may never know she prayed for them. She intercedes for family, friends, strangers, and even those who have hurt her. And through that practice, something begins happening inside her. Her heart becomes less controlled by circumstances and more anchored in God's presence. But perhaps the hardest prayer is the one she offers when she wants a specific answer. And God seems to be saying, wait. Waiting can expose every insecurity we have. It can make us question whether we heard God correctly. It can make us compare ourselves with others. It can tempt us to force an outcome simply because we are tired of uncertainty. Yet a woman learning patience discovers that forcing something does not make it God's will. Sometimes the greatest act of trust is refusing to manipulate the situation and allowing God to work in His time. This is especially difficult when an opportunity appears that seems too good to ignore. Everything may look perfect on the surface, but instead of immediately saying yes, she pauses. She prays. She seeks wise counsel. She examines the situation honestly. She asks whether the opportunity aligns with her values and her faith. And if something feels wrong, she is willing to walk away, even when walking away costs her something. Why? Because she has learned that temporary gain is not worth sacrificing long-term peace. That kind of wisdom protects her relationships too. She begins recognizing that not everyone who enters her life is meant to remain there forever. Some people are lessons. Some are companions for a season. Some relationships strengthen her faith, while others consistently pull her away from the woman God is calling her to become. This does not mean she treats people as disposable. It means she learns discernment. She can love someone while recognizing that she needs healthy boundaries, and boundaries are not the opposite of love. Sometimes boundaries are what allow love to remain healthy. A woman blessed by God does not believe she must destroy herself to prove that she cares. Jesus taught sacrificial love, but sacrificial love is not the same as allowing continual harm. Wisdom teaches her when to give, when to speak, when to forgive, and when to step back. She learns that peace is valuable, and she becomes careful about what she allows to repeatedly disturb the peace God is building within her. As this maturity develops, she becomes less interested in impressing people. She no longer needs constant recognition for every good thing she does. She can serve quietly. She can give without announcing it. She can pray for someone without telling the world. She can do the right thing even when nobody applauds. That is powerful because the approval of people is temporary, but obedience to God has eternal significance. And perhaps this is one of the clearest signs that she has changed. She no longer asks, how will this make me look? She begins asking, does this honor God? That question changes everything. It changes the way she speaks, the way she chooses friendships, the way she handles money, the way she responds to conflict, the way she treats strangers, and the way she behaves when nobody is watching. Her faith stops being something she talks about and becomes something she lives. She also becomes more grateful. Not because every part of her life is perfect, but because she has learned to recognize God's goodness in small things. She notices another morning. She appreciates a peaceful conversation. She gives thanks for people who genuinely love her. She recognizes opportunities to serve. She stops postponing gratitude until everything is fixed. And gratitude protects her heart from constantly feeling deprived because it reminds her that blessings are not only the things she is still waiting to receive. This does not mean she stops dreaming. A woman of faith can still have enormous hopes for her future. She can pray boldly. She can work toward meaningful goals. She can believe that God can open doors. But her confidence no longer depends on receiving exactly what she wants. She can say, Lord, this is what I desire, but I trust you with the outcome. That is a mature faith because it allows hope and surrender to exist together. And when disappointment comes, she does not interpret it as proof that God has rejected her. She grieves because she is human. She may need time to process what happened. She may cry. She may have questions. But eventually, she returns to the truth that God has not changed simply because circumstances changed. The closed door does not erase His faithfulness. The unanswered prayer does not erase His love. The delay does not erase His presence. Over time, this woman develops something the world cannot easily manufacture. Peace. Not the fragile peace that exists only when everything is going well, but a deeper peace that remains even when circumstances are uncertain. She can walk into an unknown future without knowing every detail. because she knows the one she trusts. She has learned that control is an illusion, but faith is a choice. And every time she chooses faith, she becomes stronger. Now imagine looking back at the woman you once were. You may remember the things that broke your heart. You may remember decisions you regret, people you lost, opportunities that disappeared, and seasons when you felt completely alone. But imagine seeing those memories through a different lens. Not as proof that your life was ruined, but as evidence that you survived. Not as proof that God abandoned you, but as moments where He was teaching you to depend on Him. You learned to survive, but survival was not the final destination. You learned to be patient. You learned that God's timing is not controlled by your anxiety. You learned that waiting does not mean wasting time. You learned that some things must be released before something new can grow. You learned that forgiveness can free your heart even when the other person never apologizes. You learned that strength can be quiet. You learned that prayer can carry you through nights when you cannot see the morning. And now your story can become encouragement for someone else. The woman who once needed someone to tell her, "You will make it through," can become the woman who tells someone else those words. The woman who once felt forgotten can become the woman who notices people everyone else overlooks. The woman who once questioned her worth can become the woman who reminds another person that their worth does not depend on human approval. That is what happens when God turns pain into purpose. But there is still one final question. If God has been shaping you through all these seasons, what does He want you to do with what you have learned? Because recognizing that you are blessed is not the end. It is an invitation to live differently. And the answer may require you to release something you have been carrying for far too long, something that has quietly been preventing you from walking fully into the peace and purpose God has prepared for you. The final step is not simply recognizing that God has blessed you. It is learning how to live like someone who trusts that blessing without becoming dependent on circumstances. Because once you understand that your worth comes from God, you no longer have to spend your life proving yourself to people who may never understand you. You can release the need for constant approval, release the fear of being misunderstood, and release the pressure to have everything figured out. You can finally breathe and say, "Lord, my life belongs to you." And that surrender is not weakness. It is the beginning of genuine freedom. Perhaps there is something you have been carrying for years that God is asking you to place in His hands. Maybe it is resentment towards someone who hurt you. Maybe it is guilt over a mistake you cannot change. Maybe it is fear about the future, disappointment over an unanswered prayer, or anxiety about something you cannot control. Whatever it is, you cannot walk freely into a new season while continually holding on to the weight of the old one. This does not mean pretending the pain never happened. It means refusing to allow that pain to become the master of your future. Forgiveness may be part of that release. Not because what happened was acceptable, and not because the person who hurt you necessarily deserves another opportunity in your life, but because bitterness can quietly consume the person carrying it. A blessed woman learns that forgiveness is ultimately an act of surrender. She places justice in God's hands and refuses to allow someone else's actions to permanently control her heart. She can remember what happened without allowing the memory to dictate who she becomes. And sometimes the person you need to forgive is yourself. You may have made decisions you regret. You may have trusted the wrong person. You may have ignored warnings. You may have wasted time. You may have walked away from God and later wondered how you could have gone so far. But your worst mistake does not have to become your final identity. God's mercy is greater than the chapter you are ashamed of. If you have turned back to Him, then do not keep living as though your past has more authority than His grace. This is why a woman blessed by God learns to walk forward without constantly looking backward. She remembers the lessons, but she does not worship the pain. She acknowledges the scars, but she does not make them her identity. She learns from failure without allowing failure to convince her that she is a failure. She recognizes that God can redeem time, restore hope, and create something meaningful from circumstances that once seemed completely wasted. And now think about everything this journey has taught her. She discovered that purpose is deeper than popularity. She learned that faith is stronger than fear. She learned that compassion can become a reflection of Christ. She learned that resilience does not mean never falling. It means rising again with God's help. She discovered that prayer is not merely a last resort, but a daily relationship with God. She learned that wisdom sometimes means moving forward and sometimes means waiting. And through all of it, she learned patience. Patience may be one of the greatest signs of spiritual maturity because it reveals what happens when you trust God with time. Anyone can be patient when they know the answer is coming tomorrow. The real test comes when you do not know when the answer will come. You continue praying, you continue serving, you continue obeying, you continue loving, you continue believing. Not because you know exactly what God will do, but because you know that He is faithful. Maybe that is where you are today. You are waiting for something. You may be waiting for healing, direction, reconciliation, an opportunity, a relationship, a change in your family, or simply a sense of peace. And because the waiting has lasted longer than you expected, you have started wondering whether God still sees you. But He has not forgotten you, simply because you cannot see the answer yet. Silence is not proof of absence. Delay is not proof of rejection. Your timeline is not the measure of God's faithfulness. Sometimes the most important thing God is doing during the waiting is not changing the situation, but changing you. He may be teaching you how to survive without becoming bitter. He may be teaching you how to trust without controlling. He may be teaching you how to love without losing yourself. He may be teaching you how to say no without guilt and yes without fear. And when the next season finally arrives, you may discover that the woman who enters it is stronger, wiser, and more prepared because of everything she learned while waiting. So do not rush through this season simply because it is uncomfortable. There is something sacred about becoming. A seed does not look impressive while it is buried, but being hidden does not mean being forgotten. Sometimes growth happens where nobody can see it. Sometimes God develops character in secret before purpose becomes visible in public. And if you are currently in a hidden season, do not assume that nothing is happening. Your roots may be growing deeper. A blessed woman also understands that she does not have to be perfect before God can use her. She can be imperfect and still obedient. She can be afraid and still courageous. She can be tired and still faithful. She can have questions and still believe. She can stumble and still get back up. The goal is not perfection. The goal is transformation. Every day, she becomes a little more like the woman God is calling her to become. And that means you should stop waiting to become perfect before you start living your purpose. Use the gifts you have today. Encourage someone today. Pray for someone today. Forgive where forgiveness is possible. Serve where you can serve. Speak words that bring life. Be generous with your time. Choose honesty when dishonesty would be easier. Choose patience when anger feels natural. Choose faith when fear is demanding control. Your purpose is not necessarily hidden in some dramatic future moment. It may already be appearing through the ordinary choices you make every day. Your family may need the patience God is developing in you. Your friends may need the compassion He has cultivated through your own struggles. Someone at work may need the encouragement you almost decided not to give. Someone in your church or community may need the wisdom you gained through years of experience. You may never realize how many lives are affected by the way you choose to live. That is why your obedience matters even when nobody applauds it. And remember, Being blessed does not mean being superior to anyone else. It does not mean you are better than people who are struggling. It means you recognize that everything good in your life ultimately points beyond yourself. So gratitude should replace pride. Compassion should replace judgment. Humility should replace self-importance. When God lifts you, reach back and help someone else. When He gives you wisdom, share it gently. When He comforts you, become a source of comfort. When He restores you, remember those who are still waiting for restoration. Your life can become a testimony without becoming a performance. You do not need to convince everyone that God is working in you. Simply live faithfully. Let your character speak. Let your patience speak. Let your kindness speak. Let your ability to forgive speak. Let your peace during difficult circumstances speak. Sometimes the most powerful sermon is not what you say, but the way you continue walking when life gives you every reason to quit. And when another storm comes, and eventually another storm will come, remember what you have already learned. Do not immediately assume that the storm means God has left you. Return to prayer. Return to Scripture. Return to the promises that carried you before. Ask for wisdom before reacting. Give yourself permission to grieve, but do not surrender your hope. You have survived before, and with God's grace, you can survive again. But this time, you will not merely survive. You will continue becoming. Perhaps that is the message you needed today. You are not forgotten simply because you are waiting. You are not abandoned simply because the path is difficult. You are not worthless because someone failed to recognize your value. You are not disqualified because your past contains mistakes. And you are not ordinary simply because your life looks ordinary from the outside. God can work through the quietest seasons, the smallest acts of obedience, and the moments nobody else sees. So walk forward with faith. When fear speaks, remember who you trust. When disappointment comes, remember what God has already carried you through. When you are tempted to compare your journey with someone else's, return to your own calling. When you are tired, pray instead of pretending you are invincible. When you are confused, seek wisdom instead of rushing. When you are waiting, practice patience instead of assuming that nothing is happening. And when you receive a blessing, remember that it is not only for you. You were created to reflect God's love in the way you live. Your compassion can become someone's encouragement. Your strength can become someone's example. Your patience can become someone's hope. Your prayers can become part of a story you may never fully see. Your testimony can remind another woman that the chapter she is living right now is not necessarily the end of her story. So if you recognize these signs in your life, do not become proud. Become grateful. If you are learning to trust God, thank Him. If you are becoming more compassionate, thank Him. If you are stronger after the storms, thank Him. If you have learned to pray when life becomes difficult, thank Him. If you are becoming wiser, more patient, and more willing to surrender your plans, thank Him. Because the greatest evidence of God's blessing may not be what you have accumulated, but who you are becoming. And if you are still waiting for those changes, do not give up. Growth takes time. Faith takes practice. Healing takes patience. Spiritual maturity develops through daily choices. You do not need to transform your entire life in one day. Take the next faithful step, then another, then another. God can use consistency in ways you cannot yet imagine. So today, stop telling yourself that you are forgotten. Stop measuring your worth by what other people say. Stop assuming that your difficult season means God has abandoned you. Look deeper. Look at the faith that has survived. Look at the compassion that has grown. Look at the wisdom you gained. Look at the strength you discovered. Look at the patience you never knew you could develop. Those things matter. You are not promised a life without storms, but you can walk through storms with hope. You are not promised immediate answers, but you can learn to trust while waiting. You are not promised that everyone will understand your calling, but you can remain faithful to it. And you are not promised that every chapter will be easy, but you can trust that God can use every chapter for His purposes. So, dear woman, keep walking, keep praying, keep believing, keep forgiving, keep growing, keep choosing faith over fear, keep seeking wisdom, keep your heart tender without becoming careless, keep your boundaries without becoming bitter, keep your hope even when the answer seems delayed. And above all, remember that your identity is not determined by your circumstances. You are God's creation, deeply loved, called to live with purpose, and invited to become a blessing to others. Perhaps one day you will look back at the season that once broke your heart and realize that it also built your faith. You will see that the delay taught you patience, the struggle taught you endurance, the disappointment taught you surrender, and the waiting taught you trust. You will realize that you were not simply surviving. God was preparing you. And that is the final lesson. Sometimes the blessing is not getting everything you asked for. Sometimes the blessing is becoming the woman who can faithfully carry whatever God places in your hands. The woman who has learned to trust without seeing, to love without applause, to forgive without bitterness, to pray without giving up, and to wait without losing hope. So if you are walking through a difficult season today, lift your heart. Your story is not over. Your waiting is not wasted. Your tears are not invisible. Your prayers are not meaningless. Keep taking the next step, because the God who carried you through yesterday can sustain you today and guide you into tomorrow. May you walk with courage when fear comes, patience when answers are delayed, wisdom when choices are difficult, compassion when others are hurting, and faith when the road ahead is unclear. And may your life become a quiet testimony that God's grace can transform even the hardest seasons into places of growth, purpose, and hope. You are not forgotten. You are not without purpose. You are not walking alone. Keep your eyes on God, keep your heart anchored in faith, and keep becoming the woman He created you to be. Because sometimes the greatest sign that you are blessed is not that life became easy. It is that through everything life brought against you, you learned to survive without losing your faith, to be patient without losing your hope, and to keep walking because you finally understood that God's hand was with you all along.